Reality's already pretty strange, right? Like, stranger than we realize. But today, oh boy, today's deep dive is going to take us down a rabbit hole. We're talking government secrets, mind control, the whole shebang. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew. It's Project M Culture time, folks. And luckily, expert speaker is here to guide us through the madness. They're like the Indiana Jones of declassified documents. So lay it on us. What kind of intel are we dealing with?
Okay, imagine this. It's like Wikipedia, but for spies.
A spyclopedia.
Exactly, except it's called Intellipedia, and it's run by the CIA. And what we're about to dive into is their file on, you guessed it, M-Culture.
Okay, top secret spy Wikipedia has my attention. Hit me with it. What was this whole M-Culture thing anyway?
Officially, the CIA's mind control and chemical interrogation program.
Catchy.
Right. But here's the thing. It ran for decades, starting back in the 50s, right in the thick of the Cold War.
Cold War, huh? Yeah, I can see where this is going. Paranoia, suspicion, everyone trying to get a leg up.
Exactly. The U.S. was convinced the Soviets were light years ahead in all this, like psychological warfare and brainwashing. Stories were coming back from Korea about POWs acting really strangely.
Dookie.
Yeah, it really freaked people out, and that's where M-Culture comes in.
So this was the U.S. trying to catch up. Or maybe even get one step ahead.
And go. They wanted to resist enemy interrogation, sure, but also maybe even use these techniques themselves. Imagine controlling someone like Fidel Castro, but with, like, drugs or hypnosis.
Okay, now that's just messed up. Who was the mastermind behind all of this?
The guy in charge, Sidney Gottlieb, chemist. He ran the CIA's technical services staff, basically the division for all their covert ops.
This wasn't some, like, rogue operation happening in a basement somewhere.
This was legit. They had over 80 universities, hospitals, research centers, all over the U.S. and Canada.
On the payroll.
You got it. And get this many of them, they had no idea.
Wait, so they just thought they were doing, like, normal research?
Yep. The money was all, like, secretly funneled through the CIA. These researchers, they were unwittingly caught in this massive web of secrecy.
That is wild. Can you imagine finding out your research was being used for mind control?
I know, right?
So what exactly were they testing? Like, what were they even trying to do?
So at the beginning, some of it, well, compared to what came later, it almost sounds tame.
Tame how?
Well, they were looking into things like truth serums for interrogations.
Makes sense.
Ways to enhance their agents' mental abilities. Drugs to help soldiers resist torture.
Okay, starting with the basics before things got a little more experimental.
You could say that.
Yeah.
It didn't take long for LSD to become, like, the star of the show. The CIA was obsessed with it.
LSD, as in the psychedelic drug.
The one and only. They thought they could break down psychological barriers with it, induce these altered states, maybe even control someone's thoughts and actions.
Ambitious.
To say the least. And they weren't exactly being, ethical about it.
I'm guessing not.
They were dosing CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, even random people off the street, often without their knowledge or consent.
Okay, yeah, that's just wrong on so many levels.
And it gets worse. They started using brothels as part of their research.
They were dosing people in brothels.
It's true. Operation Midnight Climax, they called it.
Mm-hmm.
They'd give guys LSD again, usually without telling them, and then just, like, observe their behavior.
Oh, my God. I don't even know what to say to that. That's awful.
It really shows you how twisted the logic of the Cold War was. The fear, the paranoia. They were willing to do almost anything, even if it meant sacrificing people's well-being.
So we got LSD, we've got brothels. It's going to be hard to top that. Was that the extent of it, though? Or were there other experiments, other methods they were looking into?
Oh, they had a whole bag of tricks. It wasn't just a one-time thing either with the brothels. They were also, like, looking into the long-term effects of LSD. They actually had this one experiment where they dosed volunteers for 77 days straight.
77 days? That's over 2 months on LSD. What were they even hoping to accomplish with that?
It's kind of scary, actually. It seems like they wanted to see if they could, like, break down a person's personality completely. Start from scratch.
You mean like erase their memories, change how they see the world?
Exactly. They were talking about reprogramming someone's mind.
That's some next level stuff. I mean, did they have any reason to believe that was even possible?
That's the thing about a lot of this research. There wasn't always, like, solid science behind it. It was more like speculation, Cold War paranoia, this fascination with mind control. And LSD, that was just the tip of the iceberg. They were also messing around with heroin, morphine, amphetamines.
Anything that could mess with your head, basically.
Pretty much. They were pushing the limits, seeing what they could get away with. And it wasn't all about drugs either.
Oh. What else?
Hypnosis, sensory deprivation. They even looked into magic.
Wait, hold up. Magic. Like pulling a rabbit out of a hat magic.
Not exactly, although they did consult with this famous magician, John Mulholland. He actually wrote manuals for the CIA on sleight of hand, deception, how to plant hidden messages.
So like real-life spy stuff. That's kind of cool.
It does sound like something out of a movie. But we got to remember the dark side of all this. Remember we were talking about Canada being involved?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. The Scottish psychiatrist, what was his name? Donald Cameron.
That's him. He was working at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, and surprise, surprise, he was getting funding from the CIA for his research on something he called psychic driving.
Psychic driving. Okay, now I'm really curious. What is that?
Well, Cameron, he believed he could cure schizophrenia
Okay.
by basically wiping a patient's mind clean and then, like, rebuilding it from scratch.
How did he try to do that?
His methods were pretty messed up. He'd put patients into these drug-induced comas for weeks, sometimes even months, and then while they were out, he'd subject them to these repetitive sounds messages.
So like brainwashing.
Basically. And the worst part, a lot of his patients, they weren't even schizophrenic. They were there for like anxiety, depression, really minor stuff.
You're kidding? And the CIA was funding this.
Yep. And get this, a lot of those patients, they never even agreed to be part of these experiments. The effects on some of them were awful. Memory loss, personality changes. They were never the same.
That's really heavy.
It is. Shows you what can happen when people cross the line in the name of science.
So how did any of this come out? If it was all so secretive, how did people find out about MKultra?
Well, in 1973, Richard Helms, the CIA director, he ordered all the MKultra records destroyed.
You what?
Yeah, like get rid of everything. Thousands of documents gone, shredded, burned, which makes it really tough to know the full story even now.
Wow. So they tried to bury the whole thing.
Pretty much. But thankfully, some stuff survived. And in '74, the New York Times ran this big expose on the CIA. Illegal activities, experiments on U.S. citizens, the whole 9 yards.
Classic New York Times. Someone always talks eventually.
Right. So that kicked off a whole bunch of investigations. The Church Committee, the Rockefeller Commission. And, well, what they found wasn't pretty.
I bet. So MKultra gets exposed. What about the victims? Did they ever, get any kind of justice?
Some did, eventually. But it was a fight, like a long one.
I can imagine.
And it's hard to say, really, if any amount of money can make up for that kind of trauma,
That's true. Were there any, legal consequences for the people who ran MKultra, the ones calling the shots?
Well, that's where things get even more messed up. You see, when all this came out, the CIA, they used this legal thing, the FAIRS Doctrine.
The FAIRS Doctrine? What's that?
It basically protects the government from lawsuits by active duty military, even if they're injured because of, misconduct.
Wait, so they could experiment on soldiers without consent
Yeah.
and then just hide behind this doctrine?
Pretty much. A perfect example, this guy, James Stanley, Army Sergeant. They dosed him with LSD, no consent or anything.
Awful.
He sued, of course, but the Supreme Court, they sided with the government. FAIRS Doctrine.
Wow. So much for justice. What about the civilians they caught up in this? Did any of them have any luck in court?
Some did. It wasn't easy. The CIA, they like to settle out of court, pay people off to keep quiet.
Damage control.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is no one really paid for what happened.
Basically, the CIA director at the time, Helms, he said MKultra was just a product of its time, trying to fight the Soviets,
Convenient. But that doesn't excuse anything. They knew they were experimenting on people, violating their rights.
You're preaching to the choir. And here's the thing. A lot of information about MKultra, it's still classified.
Seriously.
We may never know the full story.
That's unsettling, to say the least.
Oh.
Okay, so we've gone from Cold War paranoia to mind control, secret experiments, cover-ups. Where does that leave us? What can we learn from all of this?
It tells me we can never let our guard down. Question everything, especially those in power.
And never be afraid to shine a light on the dark corners.
Exactly. MKultra, that was then. But the things it makes you think about, the ethics of it all,
Yeah.
that's relevant today, more than ever, I think.
It's a good thing to remember. Expert speaker, this has been incredible. Thank you for taking us down the rabbit hole on this one. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Keep asking questions, folks, and stay curious. We'll see you next time.